Greetings. I'm Ed Steinfeld, Director of the Watson Institute for International and Public Affairs. Welcome to today's panel discussion on Try Harder, the fantastic and deeply thought-provoking 2021 documentary produced and directed by Debbie Lum, Brown University class of 1991. We just showed the film in person here at the Watson Institute, and this is the second time I've seen the film. It's extraordinary, and there were many tears in the room and a lot of conversation. This event is part of the Watson Institute's John F. Kennedy Jr. initiative on documentary film and social progress. In so many ways, Try Harder embodies the motivating values and aspirations of the JFK Jr. initiative. Our belief in the importance of film as an avenue for the search for truth and a reaffirmation of the importance of human dignity, our belief in the vibrancy of the intersection of the arts and journalism and scholarship, and our faith in the power of narrative in addressing the great human challenges of our time. I so look forward to the panel discussion that's about to take place. At this point, I'd like to introduce the moderator of our panel, Professor Susanna Loeb. Susanna, in addition to being a professor of education here at Brown, is director of Brown University's Annenberg Institute for School Reform. Susanna's phenomenal research focuses broadly on education policy and its role in improving educational opportunities for students. Her work has addressed issues of educator career choices and professional development, of school finance and governance, and of early childhood systems. She's the founder and acting executive director of the National Student Support Accelerator. And before moving to Brown, Susanna was the Barnett Family Professor of Education at Stanford, not so far away geographically from Lowell High School. And Susanna has done a great deal of work with the San Francisco school system. She's a member of the National Academy of Education and an American Education Research Association Fellow. In 2020, Susanna was elected to the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. And with that, Susanna, I'd love to turn it over to you. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Ed. So from me too, welcome to the panel discussion for Try Harder. We're so lucky today to have three people with us who are central to the film and who've taken their time to be here with us today, helping us to understand the important issues that the film raises. So first we have Debbie Lum. Debbie, Richard, Rachel, please all join me here. Debbie's an award-winning filmmaker as well as a graduate of Brown with a BA in Religious Studies. So welcome back to Brown, Debbie. Debbie's films projects give voice to the Asian American experience and to other unsung stories. Our film today, Try Harder, premiered at the 2021 Sundance Film Festival, while her previous documentary, Seeking Asian Female, premiered at South by Southwest, was the fan favorite on PBS's Independent Lens and won numerous awards, including Outstanding Director at the LA Asian Pacific Film Festival. So we're so pleased to have you join us today. Thank you very much for being here. Our second panel member is Rachel Schmidt. As you saw, Rachel graduated from Lowell High School in 2017. Rachel's also part of our Brown community, having graduated in 2021 with a Bachelor of Science in Biology with honors. Congratulations. Rachel, she's currently working as a neuroscience research associate at UCSF before pursuing her MD PhD. So she's really in the world now and doing great things. Welcome, Rachel. It's so great to have you here today. Finally, we have Richard Shapiro with us today, whom you all also recognize from the film. Richard taught math and science at SFUSD, San Francisco Unified School District, starting in 1985, and physics and AP physics at Lowell High School, which we saw from 1990 to 2021. At Lowell, he initiated a computer-based laboratory program, got accreditation for Lowell's AP physics courses, and co-founded Lowell's science research program at UCSF. So this was an amazing statistic that over 1,000 students have participated in this collaboration with UCSF. Richard's been nominated for Teacher of the Year for Northern California and for San Francisco. And we really are grateful for all the work you've done with your students and for joining us here today. So thank you. And let's get going and get into this terrific film. I'd like to start with just a few questions about the detail of making the film. So Debbie, we'd all love to hear your story of how you moved from the idea to making this fabulous film.
Yes, well, thank you so much. Thank you, Susanna and Ed and Brown University. It's really exciting to be here at my alma mater. Making documentaries is, especially independent ones, takes a really long time. And it definitely took us a long time to make this film. It started out originally, I was interested in exploring the stereotype of tiger mothers, the so-called, the Asian immigrant moms who push their kids for academic success at all costs. The memoir by Amy Chua had come out recently, and I was a new mom when I started making this, and my daughter was applying to kindergarten. And in San Francisco, where I live but did not grow up, I was encountering parents in preschool who were completely stressed out about getting their kid into college. And that's kind of where the initial idea came from. And Lowell High School was actually going to be just one chapter in that story until I heard about this program called the Lowell Science Research Program. And I was introduced to Mr. Shapiro, Richard here. And he introduced us to his students. Rachel was in his program, and Alvin and Ian were one of his students. And we spent hundreds of hours just interviewing students at first, until about their parents, about their moms. And eventually we realized that it was their story that was really the story that we should be telling. And so we basically pivoted, and we met all of these students that you see in the film in their junior year, pretty much. And then at the end of that year, we realized, if we could come back in the fall and just dive into their senior year and filmed from the beginning through to the end, it would be an amazing story. And that's where that's what happened.
Yeah, that's terrific. And it shows the kind of non-linear way some of this filmmaking goes. We have a bunch of aspiring filmmakers here. This is part of a series of documentary films. I'm sure they'd love to hear what they should be thinking about in making a documentary film, how they should start off, what advice you have for them.
People always ask me for advice, and I always feel like you can tell people advice, but that's the last thing that people want to hear. They want to figure it out on their own. But what, for someone like me who's making films about marginalized communities and works very independently, you have to really be passionate about your subject matter, because you are going to live with it for a really long time. If you're making a documentary, and, my last film was the same way, in which it started out in one direction. I mean, it even started out as a fiction, the last film, and then it kind of turned, and it took all of these twists and turns. But the core interest is really trying to, for me anyway, it's really trying to find a great story. Everyone has their own way of doing things, but I really love narratives, which I know I went through the Brown program here and I went through the film program, and I remember how theoretical it was, and how we were always kind of deconstructing the narratives of all of the films that we saw, and really questioning narrative practices and the way in which they kind of, present a fiction, I guess, and that fiction always has some type of a blemish on it, in which the real truth will come out. But as a maker, it's very different when you're making the film, and you think about, what you're trying to do with your story, and how you're trying to reach your audiences. And for me, I always made documentaries because when I started making films about my own community, there really weren't many avenues to telling fiction. There wasn't what you have today, you know, where you can actually see films on networks or TV series or in the theaters that have Asian American content. But when I was growing up, or when I was making, you know, young person making films, there wasn't really that opportunity. And so if you wanted to tell a story, documentary was really the way to do it. And there's a much longer tradition for Asian American films in documentaries, actually, because of that. And that's probably true for a lot of marginalized narratives. But even so, it's like, for me, it is a narrative that really speaks to an audience and humanizes a story, like these two great humans that I'm in the room with. Yeah.
Well, their wonderful humanness came out in the film, and all of the members, the students and the school that you were at, you really could feel that. You say that, you know, while doing this, you shifted from being really focused on the parents and the mothers to really wanting to tell the story of the students. What were your goals in that, and how did those goals shift when you shifted over to really focusing on the stories of the students?
Yeah, well, it was, you know, it really was a more compelling narrative when I was, well, I mean, there were two issues. One was that I met a lot of mothers who said, oh my God, someone really needs to make a film about tiger mothers, but you should go talk to that one, not me, because it was very difficult to get moms to talk about on camera that they were, you know, their own, you know, the way their own practices around supporting their children's education. But really, you know, when you look at the story, we do all, you know, we talk all about college admissions and how difficult it is, what the problems are. We look at it from, you know, theories and the educators, but it's really, you know, the student that has to go through it. And so they're kind of the primary agent in this story. And it's kind of surprising that they're not centered in the way that they are. But I mean, I guess it, you know, it makes sense. They're 17-year-old often. I mean, Rachel, you were turning 17, I think, when we filmed you. And, you know, young, not quite adult. You know, as you could see, like one of the things, one of the greatest joys in telling the story was actually to be able to just capture the teenage whimsy of us, you know, albeit very, very, very smart, high achieving young person who could talk circles around me. I like couldn't understand anything that, you know, like Rachel was in the Lowell Science Research Program too, and it was way over my head. But it's also that as a teenager, I think there's a way in which teens express themselves. And if you kind of allow them to speak, then they might give you a very different orientation towards college admissions. And it's important for parents to hear that.
Yeah, that's terrific. I'd love now to dive in kind of the heart of the movie, which is the students, the school, and also kind of what they tell us about our society more broadly and what we can learn from it. So, Rachel, I can't wait to hear your voice in this. What factored into your decision to be involved in the film?
You know, I always think about the answer for this question because it has been asked a bit and I still don't have an answer. I can't remember what I was thinking back then when I agreed to be a part of the film, but I don't mean that in a bad way. I just, you know, readily accepted without thinking too much about the implications of being involved in a movie. Debbie and the cinematographer Lou gave me the concept for the film and requested that I be one of the students that they follow. And I was so flattered and honored that they had even thought about me for that, let alone asked and chose me to be one of the students, considering how many wonderful and really interesting and talented students there are at Lowell. It's the entirety of the student body, basically. And not only that, but Debbie and Lou were so kind and warm and welcoming in their presence that I felt very comfortable talking to them candidly about how I felt throughout the whole process. So it didn't take too long for me to be on board with the idea, and I'm very grateful that I did. It's been really wonderful to see how the story that's shown in the film has touched so many people, not just current students and former students of Lowell, but college graduates and educators alike have had really, really cool conversations that I'm fortunate to have been a part of, because I was involved in the film and because so many other wonderful people agreed to be part of the film as well.
That's great. And as you look back on these experiences, or you think more about all these opportunities that you've had to kind of think about your high school, many of us don't spend as much time thinking about that. I'd really love to know what you think about your experiences there, what you cherish that you got to do, and other things that you'd want to change about just your day-to-day experiences at the school.
There were many things that struck me when I first watched the film. Number one, it's reliving high school. So that's a little triggering in a sense, in some ways, especially because that period of time was very stressful, the whole college application process. So I did relive some of the moments of fear and anticipation, but also excitement. But also watching the film really reminded me how special of a place Lowell is. This is just an opinion because I haven't been to any other high school. I was at Lowell all 4 years, but I really felt that the environment that Lowell provided allowed me to completely be myself and also discover parts of myself that maybe I wouldn't have had the chance to do at another high school. Because at Lowell, the overwhelming majority of students, loved learning, took it seriously, had fun learning, and took a lot of satisfaction and pride in working hard and learning hard. And it's really unique to find that kind of environment. So it just reminded me how special of a place Lowell was and how it's really hard to find any other place like it. There are many other schools around the country like Lowell, but I just felt very grateful to have been in that place at that time.
That's so helpful. If you think back, there's so much learning that went on. Are there kind of capacities that you developed there that you feel really good about, academically, socially? And similarly, are there things you wish you'd gotten the opportunity, capacities that you wish you'd gotten the opportunity to develop, that because of the focus on learning, you might not have been able to focus on as much in your high school experience?
Yes, actually, I feel as though Lowell helped me discover how much I liked learning and how much I actually care about academics. Before I got to high school, I had never given much thought to grades or studying. I did my homework and that was about it. But the environment of being surrounded by so many like-minded people who also are very driven and passionate about learning and what they want to do beyond high school, it really inspired me to try harder, hence the title, and just push myself beyond what I thought I was capable of. But on the flip side, with that, you had many students like myself where we devoted a lot of our time to studying and extracurriculars, and those can be great opportunities to personally develop. But there were many moments after high school where I realized I should have done a couple of things differently. One of those being spending more time thinking thoughtfully about my mental health, valuing it, and doing things to protect it and improve it when it gets a little low, which it can at times. I don't think I got the opportunity to do that as much at Lowell. And another thing is also developing my sense of what I like to do beyond school. That was something that Brown actually really helped me to do because of the open curriculum. I really got to try a bunch of different things, get involved in different clubs, and get a sense of what I want to do in life. But I think at Lowell, it's very easy to think of what we do in terms of grades, classes, extracurriculars as things that will get us to college rather than things that should be developing us as people, while also, getting us to college where we want to go in life. But yeah, those were a few things I wished I had developed my skills a little bit more in high school, but I eventually got there. And without the academic environment of Lowell, I don't think I would have been as prepared for Brown as I was. So give and take.
That's great. Richard, I love your thoughts on this too. Or what are you most proud of in your work at Lowell?
Well, first of all, I want to say, I want to answer one of your original question to Rachel about why she was in the film. And it goes back to your original question to Debbie about advice to filmmakers. So if I might be so bold as to give a little advice to at least documentary filmmakers, and that is, if you are open to loving your subjects, the actual humans you interact with, and are able to, like Debbie did for me, make them feel, surround them with warmth and creativity and make them feel comfortable, then 90% is done. And then then you do then you're at least able to do whatever you're capable of doing. And so in that sense, I think that was, Rachel said something like that. And so I think that sheds also light on the filmmaker and the film, and the fact that, now to answer your question, at Lowell, the humanity that came through Debbie's characters, that as if they were lovingly created fictional characters, is something that is just absolutely normal at Lowell. And if you've seen the film several times, like I have, you tend to start looking what's behind the camera, or not behind the subject of the camera. And what you see in the background, and maybe even out of focus, is our students being very kind and generous with each other and being very supportive. And that's the zeitgeist and at Lowell, despite the enormous pressure and stresses that kids go through. So being in that environment and then having students put their trust in you and was very powerful for me. And I don't mean subject matter trust, beyond that. And to be open about showing their appreciation. It makes you feel good and proud about just simply being there every day. It wants you to be there every day. And sometimes maybe be there a little bit too early and a little bit too late. And what everyone who might be looking at this should know, that is typical for a great many students and teachers at Lowell. They probably spend too much time there because it's such a wonderful place to be.
That's yeah, it's such a good thing to hear, particularly given all the stresses that the students are under. And you really get that sense in the film. I agree that you see in the background the students really being caring. Are there things now that you've just been out for a year, I guess, that you look back and say, well, I wish we did this also, or there are ways that we would have liked to support students through this process and others in the school that you would like to see expand?
There actually are a few things. One is I really wish I would have done something with the science research program much earlier. And in the 90s, I tried to get things going, but I just wasn't able to for a number of reasons. And not ironically, the solution was a former student came to visit, and with her efforts, something pretty amazing came into existence. So it's kind of like, Lowell births its own solutions to problems at times. I wish I would have emphasized the primacy of students working in groups and being in a meaningful way, and being able to express themselves and take risks earlier. But it did slowly dawn on me that that's critical to the students' growth, more critical than the actual subject matter. And I also, something out of my control that I would like to see actually in all high schools is the opportunity for longer classes. I mean, we're not, the day is 24 hours, but a 3 or 4 hour class it will have, I think, a much greater yield than a 3 hour class than, say, 3 50-minute class or 4 50-minute classes, however you want to squeeze the arithmetic in.
Yeah, we actually get the opportunity in colleges to do that. We can decide whether we want 5 classes a little bit every day or concentrated, and that's really helpful because different things are better in different time periods.
As unsatisfying as the last year or the year and a half, actually, almost a year and a half on Zoom was at Lowell, I did learn something very valuable, and that is that my students greatly appreciated and really wanted the videos of every class. And Zoom has the opportunity where it's not just talking, lecturing, but this writing, doing problems and so forth that they can see on the screen. That this became would have been a much more efficient way of teaching, and would have allowed, that is, if things were recorded and posted immediately, and for students to go over, it would have been more efficient for their learning, and there would have been more class time for more personal interaction. So I learned that at the very, 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 very end.
Yeah, Debbie, I'd love your thoughts.
As an outsider to Lowell High School, because I grew up in a completely different environment in St. Louis, Missouri, and in a different era. And I went to a very small private college preparatory high school, where I'm sure the objectives were very similar, which is to get into a great college. And so one of the things I really appreciated about Lowell was that it's the largest public high school in the district. It is a place where you can, it represents this idea that, an excellent education should be a right, a public right, for free, right? And it can prepare a student in a public school setting for the rigors of any, higher learning, if that's what you wish for. And I think, the people that I knew from my generation who went to Lowell High School, they went to a kind of a different Lowell High School that was much more of a sort of all-around high school where sports was a really big thing and theater could be a really big thing if you wanted. And they had the best dances in the district. And, kind of what it's known for today even is that it had like as many extracurricular clubs as you could possibly imagine. If there was something you wanted to explore, some student, a friend of Rachel's, would have, created a club for it and like gone, off the charts trying to find out. And, we found that like we filmed a little bit of that where you could see, different types of interests, clubs, posters, and things like that. One of the moms said it's like the Disney World of high schools because it could offer you like anything that you wanted. And we weren't able to really include all of that in our film. We were telling a story that is universal, that I think high school kids across the country and even the world are experiencing, where there's this kind of like, childhood is not the same as it used to be. And there's all these really, intense external pressures that students have to contend with that are coming down from outside of Lowell High School, the dwindling acceptance rates and the over marketing towards kids of these like selling them dreams and things like that are unattainable. But at Lowell, and we weren't able to necessarily dive into all the particularities about Lowell High School, but they did. I mean, we saw it. One of the things that we filmed that we didn't include was like after Richard had to take a leave, one of the other physics teachers had been influenced by a speaker who had come to Lowell, and he did this whole grading experiment where he tried to not he took away grades from his like a Brown pass fail type of thing, where it was similar, but it was they were allowed to give themselves any grade they wanted, the grade that they felt that they so he was trying to look at this whole thing about grading and how does it affect learning, and there were things like that happening all the time. That's just like one thing that happened at Lowell, but things like that were happening all the time. And so I think people have this idea that, oh, there's this problem and there's too much competition. And, we always are looking for something to scapegoat in that problem. And it's, we're all kind of part of this problem. It's not like, it's these many different layers to it. But I guess that's what I when I saw the students at Lowell who were putting so much time into like living and breathing school in a way that we never did that as kids. We had a lot of downtime in front of a television. I also felt like I saw that everywhere when I talked to people in other high schools throughout the Bay Area, friends in other states. It's really an issue that's we're having in high schools overall.
I mean, there's some richness to it that you're talking about, but we do have this system where some colleges that's kind of focused on colleges, and that some colleges are harder to get into than other colleges. And, there's a lot of talk, we could change the weighting of test scores or the importance of grades or extracurricular activities, but you're left with some colleges being just in much higher demand than others. And given that, what do you think the high schools should do, both to inspire and challenge students like we saw here, but also to have them leave school inspired and excited about their next steps, even if they can't go to Berkeley or UCLA or Stanford if you're in the Bay Area, similar places here. Given this system that's so hard to change, are there things that can be done for students and by schools? I'd love any of you actually to chime in on this.
Richard, my take on this is that I tell parents in particular that if you think about who's not getting in to all those, just like the narrow band of top schools that are out there, Brown included, right? All of those kids are going to colleges elsewhere. And like, the level of learning of the students it's like, I would never have gotten into Brown today, and I would have ended up in a college that was perfectly suitable for me and my my peer group of learners, I'm sure. And so that's one thing that I always remind parents. And it's also a long game. It's like college is going to be one point, and then you're going to go to graduate school or you're going to go to somewhere else, and people forget that. But I do think that I've talked to so many parents and hundreds and hundreds of kids. And we're kind of at a point where it's so impacted the thinking that you almost have to do something radical for there to be another way of looking at it, which is what we're doing right now, the pandemic.
Pandemic to the rescue, great.
And to reevaluate like what is really important to you. It is challenging.
Rachel, do you have any thoughts on this, and what could be done to make that a more positive experience, to make the beginning of 12th grade a more positive experience?
I think so much of what I went through in high school when talking about the college applications is centered around maybe an understanding that you will get in, but the conversation doesn't focus on what to do if you don't get in. So I've been thinking more about the normalization of rejection, specifically when it comes to high school students applying to colleges. For many young people in high school, when they apply to colleges, it's the first time they're putting who they are out there to be judged, in essence. Maybe they've applied to jobs while they're in high school, but for most people, especially for me, that was the first time I had poured my heart out into an essay, wrote about my life experiences, all the things that I had worked on for 4 years. I assembled it into an application, and then to experience that kind of rejection in terms of a no from a college and not know why, like why was what I had put together not good enough? That was the ultimate question. If we were to normalize that and tell students that it's such a common part of not just applying to colleges, but just a normal part of life, it would make something that feels so momentous and disastrous, it would make it not such a blow to one's psyche, I feel. So maybe if we could do something more for high school students, normalizing that just in life in general.
Yeah, that's so interesting. Oh, sorry, Richard, you go.
Yeah, I mean, there's ways to work with and deal with and reduce the stress that was evident in the students in the film in terms of college acceptance / rejection. But another element of which should be done. I mean, Rachel's clearly right. But another, to me, powerful element is the fact that the students really did deal with it quite well. The degree of suffering, say, is extremely short term. And as far as I know, the overwhelming, 90 high 90% of students at Lowell really end up on their feet very quickly. So it is a problem. It does need to be dealt with. What I think I'm more concerned with is how the deck is being stacked against kids at Lowell. And I don't know if it's at other schools like Lowell in so many ways. I know I mentioned in the film that my students in the 90s who were absolutely top students could walk into Berkeley, and now it's almost as hard to get into Berkeley as to get into Stanford for these students. And there's political reasons for that. The quality of the student accomplishment hasn't gone down. So there's outside forces. The University of California doesn't want to take too many students that look alike or fit certain characteristics. They don't want to take too many students from one school, despite the fact that they qualify based on the published criteria that the university gives. And so this actually hurts Lowell students, or at other schools similar to Lowell. And I think that in the last 10 or 15 years, there have been very bizarre local political factors that have hurt Lowell students, such as the vice president of the Board of Education in San Francisco condemned in writing Lowell, the Lowell Asian students for working too hard and doing too well. And I think that there's a lot that exists in our society that can be accurately described as madness that affects high school students in very negative ways. And that's without getting into any kind of political rant, because it's not so much about politics as about political forces and factors losing touch with humanity. And I think that affects students at Lowell in a much wider and deeper way than in many other schools.
And do either of you have any thoughts on that or additional?
Rachel reminded me that was in my proposal in making the film. I was very interested in how a young person deals with failure today, because failure they're going to be confronted by it in a way that none of us would have experienced it in our generation. When you have kids applying to 30 schools, that means that they're going to have like 20 experiences of rejection. And like, what is that going to do to a young person? So it would be great if students could see that in the very reasonable way that many of the kids actually articulated that. I actually think we cut it out of the film because we didn't have time for it. But Sophia, when we interviewed her about it, she said, you have to remember that you can't take it personally. When you get rejected from college, you're 17 or 18 years old, and it's not, it's a mind game, because a student is asked to basically audition themselves to get into college. It's like you're auditioning for a part. The part you're playing is yourself, and then you get rejected. It feels like it's a real, mark. It's just a count against who you are. But Sophia, I remember her saying that you have to remember it's not about who you are. It's all these other factors, and that's a very hard thing for a person, an adult, to understand. But at the same time, you don't know until you go through it how it will influence you or impact your mental health when you experience all of those rejections. So we're not at the point yet where we embrace rejection in our society. We still think of that as an indication of failure, or loss. But when and a really practical solution maybe high schools could do would be to limit the number of colleges you could apply to. Not let their students apply to 25 colleges. Maybe say the maximum is 8. Then a student has to think about, like, what is the college that I really want to go to? We've kind of gotten very removed from that in life. And also, we're like, we're overwhelmed by choice in America to the point where we're like paralyzed, I think, in terms of knowing what we should do.
And it is interesting, this idea that maybe from the rejection, it can be it can lead to mental health problems, but it can also lead to growth and to a kind of understanding of purpose in a way that if you never experience that kind of rejection, at least when you're young, you don't have that opportunity to ground yourself. And as long as those supports are there. I'm sure there are lots of questions from the audience, so I'd love to open it up. And if there aren't enough there, I've got tons more. I'd love to hear more about many aspects of it. So let me just open it up and see if I have any. Here's one. So Alexander writes, as someone who lives in Marin, I heard that the public schools in San Francisco now have a lottery system of getting into specific high schools. How do you view San Francisco's new policies for Lowell students' admittance and how it affects the students' culture at Lowell? Does it diversify the class? Do you view it as beneficial to college admissions?
Richard.
Okay.
This is going. Yeah.
Well, first of all, the SFUSD lottery needs to be defined as not a lottery, because everyone knows what the word lottery means. You pick names, you pick numbers out of a hat. It doesn't work like that. So there's things that are behind the scenes that operate in how names get picked or chosen. It's being kept a secret. So I'm not really sure what's going on, but the school district clearly wants to diversify Lowell and does not want to diversify some other schools, which is very bizarre to begin with. So, and the word in San Francisco or at Lowell, to diversify Lowell means less Asian students. That's number one, or less, at least in part, what that means. And so the percent, it's Lowell ever since I was there, and probably before, which goes to 1991. has always been trying to convince other minority students to apply there, with some success in a couple decades back, but never great success. And and that success has definitely fallen off in the last 10 or 15 years. So it is shameful that the lack of diversity at Lowell is shameful. But apparently there's a lot of students who don't want to go to Lowell. And one of the great strengths of Lowell is essentially has been everybody who was there really wanted to be there. And I'm not so sure from what I hear, and I'm not at Lowell this year, that's not entirely the case. And to color the portrait of what goes on in the district a little bit more fully, I believe this can be looked up, but I'm going to be pretty close, that the percentage of the Asian students at Lowell is around 51% now. And there's two other reasonably large high schools in Lowell that have higher Asian percentages at their schools. So the district, for some reason, is fixated on Lowell, and that's not going to end up doing anyone any good.
I think it would be interesting, though, to think about what a more diverse high school, what benefits that would have. In addition, I loved what you said about the benefits of having people there who wanted to be there. And that seems to be an important part of this, because the students were really willing to work so hard because this is the kind of place that they wanted to be. But do you see things, any of the three of you, that some benefits that you could have by having a more diverse population?
I'll let someone else go.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, Lowell, from an outsider's point of view, I think there's what I've heard from students at Lowell, I should say, like the more, to students after we were there. I think there's students who supported the change to the lottery system, and there's definitely students who were against it. And I think maybe the ones who are for the lottery tended to be more vocal because of the times. They're very savvy, media savvy kids today. Diversity is one of those words that it's kind of a catch-all, not necessarily sure what it defines at times. There's if you guys want more information about Lowell in particular, the SF Chronicle came out with an article just a few days ago about the racial diversity of Lowell as well as other schools in the district, and compared it to these elite public schools across the country, and that Lowell kind of falls very much in the middle in terms of the way it compares to other high schools, both like it and not like it. And like Richard said, there's another selective admissions high school in San Francisco, which is equally undiverse, doesn't have as many, or has more of one group than another, and nobody really cares about that particular school because it's the school of the arts, and it's not Asian kids that are the majority population there. And also Asian kids are not the majority at other public high schools in San Francisco. And another way that it's different is that Asian American kids are a much larger percentage of the population in San Francisco Unified School District, the public school district, which has always struck me as a storyteller who's Asian American. As Richard told me when we were filming, if that community of students ever wanted to have a political action, they just needed to have a strike for the day. The whole school district would shut down because Asian Americans are the base. They're the core of the public school district. But But at the same time, if you look at California, where there are the most representation of Asian Americans, it's kind of like everything, the so-called bamboo ceiling, where, we're there in numbers, but not so much in terms of leadership. We're not sitting on the school boards in the same proportion. We haven't really had as much of a political voice. And I think that's where the politics gets involved. I mean, and that is not to say that if you ask we asked the kids this when we were there about diversity, and everyone said pretty much, yes, we wish there were more Black and brown students at Lowell High School. Definitely. So it's not, but it's at the same time. So I think sometimes we're talking about apples and oranges when we look at how you kind of regulate diversity. It's just, we're in this, our great experiment of our country. It's not quite working out so well at times. Yeah, I mean, there's all of these.
Yeah, at times it does. So we're getting close to our time, but I want to bring it back to Brown for a second, and as students go into college, because I know that many students who end up at Brown and at similar schools, they've spent a lot of time in high school thinking about getting into high schools and getting into college and preparing for college, but then they come and now they need a new goal because they're in school. And Rachel, you mentioned this a little bit in the beginning. It's like, how do you then adjust to what you want to do with your life and to the new goals and values that you have? And I'm interested to what happened with the students in the film and what you see the role of some of the things we've talked about in terms of mental health supports, in terms of changes in high school or experiences in high schools that could help the students make that adjustment. If you've seen that adjustment is difficult for many of the students who have been so intensely interested in getting into schools and which schools they're going to be going to. And Rachel, maybe you are clearly the one who is most central and have had the most recent experience at this.
It can be overwhelming when you go from high school, where that's where all you were focusing your energy on, college applications. I've got to get into the school of my dreams. I'm now at a school, whether it's the one you envisioned yourself being at, or if it's something else on your list of schools that you applied to. It's like, what do you do from here? Where do you go? Especially if it's a college that maybe you hadn't originally thought was your number one choice or the one that you always wanted to go to. I think keeping yourself open and receptive to the good that alternative paths in life can bring is really important. If you go into something not happy or satisfied already and not willing to receive what can come from that situation, chances are nothing's going to come to you because you're not receptive to it. So really being open-minded and allowing yourself to explore in this brand new environment, especially for college, if you manage to live somewhere else than from where you grew up or where you live, it's an opportunity to be independent, figure out what you like, and have a completely new identity separate from who you were in high school. It's kind of like you can start your life all over again in an essence. So really take advantage of that and figure out who you are as a person aside from high school and academics and all sorts of things. Figure out who you are holistically in all realms and aspects of life.
Did you find that the students that, got into their dream school versus those who didn't had any difference in that? Because even if you get into your dream school, then you're there, but still you need new goals in life because you've still gone through high school. Did you see any kind of how that adjustment to college differed for different students in your class?
It's hard to say because I've only been thinking about it from the context of me. Debbie, I don't know if you'd like to speak about it since you've seen all
Yeah,
five
I mean,
students.
we have been kept in touch with our students, and then even the chorus of kids who are in our film. And it's individual, I would say. And it goes in waves too. And so I think, Alvin, for example, when he went to Berkeley, we were all a little worried. I'm sure Richard felt the same way. We really, just a little backstory, he got into UC San Diego, which in neuroscience and in the realm of medical schools, is like a really great program. And he personally knew the scientists in the labs there from his experience at UC. So everyone, Richard was trying to encourage him to think about that, think about really what the school meant, not what it stood for, but like what is tangible there. And so when he went to Berkeley, we were all a little bit concerned. And but at his freshman year, he had the classic college experience. He got a girlfriend. She was from Mexico. They went to Tijuana. Oh my gosh, I probably shouldn't be sharing all this, but like he was having a great time. And then the pandemic hit, and then he had to move back home. And other students who, like I know personally who there's this, you could Google it. There's like a Malcolm Gladwell TED Talk or YouTube or something about, what happens, like how it's so much better to be at the absolute best school as it is to be in the best school for you, the subjectively best school for you, where you are amongst, like in your element. And I think that also happens, like students. I have heard from students who got into their dream schools who have struggled with, the stress and the mental health repercussions of that stress, of feeling like, it's too hard, or feeling like you're an imposter, which you can get at any school, really. But I think it goes in all different directions. And it is hard to just like go off to college and be an adult for the first time in your life, regardless of where you go to school. And therefore, all of the grownups in the room should just try to make it as easy as possible for you, I think. I mean, that's the ultimate goal, really, right?
That's a nice way for us to wrap up, I think. And I think what's so great about the film, and just getting to talk with all three of you here today, is it gives, I mean, I guess it's this storytelling. It gives the humanity of it, how good and rich all the people are who are involved in this story, and are in Lowell High School, but then are in high schools all across the country, really working hard, really adults caring for students struggling to figure out their purpose, but really working hard on it. And so thank you very much for giving us such a lovely film, and for all three of you for really being here today and giving us this window into it. So I think, do you have any last words before we take off?
I would just say that we love to connect with audiences. And if you want to find us on our website, tryharderfilm.com, please reach out. We made this film to connect with students and families. So thank you so much.
And you are all welcome at Brown anytime you're near and on the East Coast, please come back. Ed, here you are.
And I just want to thank everybody. I have so enjoyed this conversation. I wish only that it were longer and that we had more opportunities to get together. We have to do it again in the future.